Welcome to the Avro Heritage Museum podcast, supported by Museum Development North and Arts Council England.
The main job of our podcast is to produce episodes that bring to life Alliot Verdon Roe's aviation heritage. But today, we're going to get a glimpse into a rather different part of AVR's early life. We're going to go back to 1893, when he is 16 years old and signs up for a 5-year apprenticeship at Horwich Locoworks, which at the time provided some of the best railway engineering training in the country. He started on just 5 shillings a week, working from 6 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. We'll be hearing about his skill as an apprentice, about some of the madcap things that he got up to as a teenager, how things he learned as an apprentice could well have stood him in good stead in his later glittering career in aviation, and we ponder the reasons why he didn't stick with the railways. I was fortunate to have Derek Cartwright from the Horwich Heritage Society to tell this much lesser known part of A.V. Roe's life story. I'll let Derek introduce himself and all will be revealed.
Yeah, I'm Derek Cartwright. I'm a long-lived person in Horwich. I've lived there all my life. I was born in the town. I'm presently the secretary of Horwich Heritage. Horwich Heritage Society was born 2 years after the closure of Horwich Railway Works back in 1983. So Horwich Heritage has been in existence for about 40 years. My previous life, I've done a number of things in my working life, but I importantly for this particular line of discussion, I served my apprenticeship on Horwich Works back in the late 1970s and up to around 1983, when closure happened and we were all made redundant, basically, as was 7 of my immediate family. But when I was on there, it's when I first became aware of this individual who moved on to build aircraft. And it was said in pride, not by the foreman, by the bosses or by the training instructors, but by the guys I worked with. And I clearly remember a chap I worked with called Bob Cookson, and we used to repair, as an apprentice, I worked with him, we were repairing lifting gear. And there was a rail at the end of the bench where we hung the completed pieces of lifting gear, block and tattles and that type of thing. And this chap came and leaned on this rail. And we were talking about Horwich Works. He was talking about the history of Horwich Works. And he said with pride about, did you know A.V. Roe worked here? He worked in these shops. He was a fitter here. He worked in these shops and he's an apprentice, and he went away to build aircraft. And the most famous one we can all probably think of is the Lancaster bomber, the Avro Lancaster bomber. And it was said with pride, and it was said with a deep sense of place that chap walked around these buildings that we were in at the time.
Could I ask, was that written down somewhere, or do you think that was just people passing on that memory?
I don't. There are newspaper articles from the 1950s in particular when A.V. Roe died, but I don't think it was written down. It was passed on, and there would have been a time when, as apprentices, people were perhaps told about A.V. Roe. But we weren't as apprentices as part of the apprentice process. But we were told by other people who worked there, and these were people on the tools, on the ground. They were the people who did the job. And he wasn't the only chap who told me. Other people told me as well in the different places I worked on Horwich Works. And it was really said with this sense of pride and greatness, really, that he was part of what we are doing. So it was a really a good thing, and I think it stuck really with me from that point onwards. And over time, I have learned little bits more about A.V. Roe and his time in Horwich. Horwich was a town that was built largely on the back of the arrival of the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway in the 1880s, and in the late 1880s, a guy called John Aspinall, who later became Sir John Aspinall, became the chief mechanical engineer of the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway, and he was based at Horwich. John Aspinall believed in education and developing a well-educated workforce and a body of tradesmen, and he built a mechanics institute. which was fairly common in other parts of the railway sector in the country. but it was the thing that Horwich had never had before, and it was like a very, very focused university, if you will. So people arrived there in the technical school at the age of 14 when they left school, and the apprentice process was that they would be in the technical school for a while, and then they would go on to the Horwich Works where they'd be office boys and the like, and the whole apprentice process might be 7 years. But what Aspinall did as well, he established what we call the premium apprentice. So these were selected individuals who were recruited as premium apprentices. And in fact, my year when I was there in 1978, we had a premium apprentice in every year. He was an excellent engineer and a good guy, and I've often wondered where he's gone to now. So it's something that didn't stop in the 1900s. It carried on. But I believe that A.V. Roe was one of these premium apprentices. So they might have had a slightly different track around the Horwich Works than I did. They would have been dipping into different departments, test centres, metallurgy, the foundries, the steel foundry and all the rest of it. But they would have also worked actually on the stripping down and rebuilding steam locomotives at rolling stock. They'd have worked on machinery in the smithy, even in the paint departments and the like. They'd have spent time in the drawing office doing the design work, and of course locomotives at that time were designed in the drawing offices at Horwich Works, some of which are still around now. So A.V. Roe, I believe, was one of these premier apprentices, and as such he would have been given projects to do, and possibly with other apprentices. But one that I've seen while spending time at the Avro Museum is this self-coupling connection, which would be used to couple probably rolling stock together. So when the two things touch, they lock together, and they would have to pull a lever or push something to release them again at some point after. And it was probably an original piece of design, that. Now, I know that A.V. Roe had quite a lot to do with it, and he may have done it completely alone, but I suspect they'd have done it with others, and they would have been given a research project, and this would have been it. I'm fairly sure that modern rolling stock connections would have been based on this type of thing. I'm not saying it's exactly that, but based on this type of thing.
I was going to ask that, Derek. So that was ahead of its time.
Absolutely ahead of its time, and I'm fairly sure that principle of when they made contact, they're locked in this two-hand cup type locking system would have been developed in later years in different ways, and there might have been other people who further researched and developed it. But if you look at modern rolling stock now, they have an arm between each unit in an electrical multiple unit, which when they touch they lock together, and that will be the similar type thing what he designed then.
So there's strong indication there of somebody who was going to be visionary.
Absolutely, and I think the visionary thing is a big thing. He arrived at Horwich when Horwich was seen as a very progressive engineering establishment, and it was led by John Aspinall, who was a very progressive manager of his day. And other railway engineers were there at the same time. So A.V. Roe was there in the 1890s up till the early 1900s. But another very famous railway engineer, Sir Nigel Gresley, spent time around that time working with Aspinall. And of course, he went on to design the Mollard and the most famous locomotive in the world, the Flying Scotsman, when he was chief mechanical engineer of the London North East Railway. So some really top flying engineers went through that process at the same time as did A.V. Roe. It's interesting when he moved on, the thoughts about him moving on, because I've often wondered about this. He was arrived at a time when the place was booming, the railway industry was booming, it was cutting edge engineering, things were developing quickly all over the place with the railway and all over the world. They were copying the British system everywhere in the world, and British engineers were going all over the world to build them. But it does appear from the information we have that A.V. Roe, I wondered whether he got a bit bored with it, because the information we've got is that he spent a lot of time while in Horwich, and I'm fairly sure he would have been in lodgings in Horwich, probably in the Victoria Road area, which a lot of the railway engineers were at the time. It seems that he got involved in other things. This Mechanics Institute was the centre not just for engineering apprenticeships and engineering education, it was also the centre for the social activity of the town, and there were lots of Railway Mechanic Institute, RMI, societies, shooting clubs, cricket, tennis, bowls, all types of things. And it's there we find A.V. Roe very much involved. He was said to be an avid cyclist, and he won lots of local cycling events, lots of cycle races, and he feared no one. and he tuned his bike up so it would be absolutely at the edge of performance. And there's even one story where he was riding his bike to a race. The bike. He rode it that fast, the tyres overheated on these primitive tyres. He repaired it, got it back on, went to the race and won the race on a repaired tyre. He was involved in many things, and there was an individual who knew him at the time who said that all these apprentices were mad, but young Roe, Avi Roe, was the maddest of the lot. And that's a quote in the newspaper. If they left school in the locality, they'd have gone to be an apprentice into the technical school from about 14, but they'd have been office boys soon after that. And they'd have come out of their apprenticeship when they're about 21. So he may have arrived after he was 14, but he would have been young. He'd have been that sort of age, late teens, when he were involved in that. But he, as well as being an avid cyclist, he was a runner. And he ran for one of the RMI, Railway Mechanics Institute, running clubs. Later, those running clubs became known as the Horwich Harriers. But Horwich Harriers didn't exist in the 1900, but it was he became involved in them. And the stories were he and a rival were out running himself, and his trousers were coming down as he was running through Horwich. And because he had to hold his trousers up, Avi Roe didn't win the race. And his colleague was shouting, "Take long strides, Roe, you're better than that." So he was definitely an active individual around the town. There was one occasion we've read about where he was skating on the ice in a lodge near Horwich and fell through the water. And the rumour went round that Alliot Verdon Roe had died in the lodge. Of course, he hadn't. And one individual said, when he heard he died, "Well, I'm not surprised with this daredevil and his antics he's up to. I'm not surprised. He would never die a natural death. This was always going to happen to him." Of course, he hadn't died, and he lived to fight another day. But also, he was involved with the amateur dramatics. The RMI had amateur dramatics and all types of productions that they put on, and pantomimes. And we've got evidence of him being dressed in drag as a princess in a pantomime in the early 1900s. So he was very much involved in the social fabric and the social life in Horwich. The Mechanics Institute had steps up the front, about half a dozen steps going into the main front doors, which were very, very majestic, lovely building. Not there anymore, burnt down, unfortunately, in the mid-1970s. But about six steps going to the front door. Avi Roe on his bike actually bumped up these steps and rode down them. And he did exactly the same thing at Bolton Town Hall, which has got more than 6 steps. It's got 30 or 40, leading up to 2 big lions going into Bolton Town Hall. He bumped up them and rode down them. And when he was, this was referred back to him in the 1950s, about him riding up the steps and riding down. He said, "I didn't ride up the steps, I bumped up, but I'd certainly rode down them." And he was known for his antics around town like that. So he was definitely a well-known individual who had an edge. Now, I wondered, going back to my point earlier, whether the formal structure of the railways and the hierarchy and the formality of apprenticeships at the time might have bored this guy who had an imagination, who had a drive and an enthusiasm to do other things. And I wonder whether all that bored him, and these other things he got involved with are things to fulfil his desire to enjoy life and to push things on. I just wonder whether that were the case. But whatever it was, he made a difference in Horwich, and he's remembered in Horwich. Guys on the tools at Horwich Works remembered him and told younger people, and I was one that they told, and they said it with pride, that he worked here and he walked these places, he walked through these doors and did these things. And the test department that we had, where we tested metal and chains and all the rest of it, that was a part where he worked. And in I think it was 1909 when he flew an aircraft in Blackpool. The guy who used to be his colleague ran into the test shop and said, "Roe's just flown this aircraft and it's done 100 yards," and they were all that was left to a round of applause in the place. So it was remembered from then to the closure of the works. And I'm pleased at Horwich Heritage that we're able to keep records, and people have been able to write the story of Avi Roe and his time in Horwich and his antics around the town as well.
Do we know if he stayed in touch? He left the aircraft company in 1928 and went south to build flying boats. Do we know if he ever kept in touch with people up north? In Horwich particularly.
He certainly did. There was a local planner who's worked for Horwich Council who he kept in touch with, a guy called Green, Mr. Green, a former surveyor. He kept in touch with the rest of his life. And it's a surprise. It's a strange thing that this Mr. Green died only a few weeks before A.V. Roe did. But also, A.V. Roe attended the technical college and gave talks to the students, and there was an A.V. Roe scholarship, I believe, and a trophy that he used to give out to the top apprentice. And it was only in 1958 that he was not in a healthy condition to travel, that he actually wrote a letter to them to pass on to to be read out to the students. So I think he remembers his education with pride. He probably held it in very, very high regard, as a lot of railway engineers do and did. And he probably had quite a fond memory of the town that he grew up with, the town he cycled around, the town that he fell through the ice in the river in the lodge, the town that he did his running in, and where he dressed in drag and played a princess in a Christmas pantomime. I'm sure he had fond memories of them days around the turn of the 20th century.
And when he died, was there a reaction locally? Did it get reported?
Yeah, it did. There was several newspaper articles, which is where we've got some of the stories from, because people who contributed to those articles were people who remember him being in the town. Of course, in 1958, there had been older people themselves, but they were around. So it was reported. And even today, we're trying to find this lodging around the Victoria Road area in Horwich, where he lived. We're fairly sure that's where he would have lodged. He may have commuted sometime. We're living in central Manchester. He could have commuted on occasion, but I'm fairly sure he would have been in lodgings. And we're trying to find a place, so we want to put a plaque up somewhere. And we'll carry on until we find somewhere. Victoria Road had some large semi-detached houses and some other large houses where the directors and senior managers lived, but also where people like A.V. Roe lived. So we're fairly sure it's in this certain group of houses, but we can't be sure exactly which one. So when we do, we'll be honouring his presence by putting a plaque up, and that's an important thing for future generations.
Aircraft may seem a long way away from trains, but do you see connections that would have come out of that apprenticeship that might have gone over to?
Absolutely. There's engineering is engineering, and he would have had a sound engineering grounding. As I said earlier, moving around different departments of the railway works, looking at the steel foundries, the metallurgy, the test centres they were in, all the different parts of the place, plus the actual education that he had as an engineer would have given him a sound grounding. And I know we've seen a piece in one of the newspaper articles where when he left his employment at the railway, and he finished up in the Merchant Navy, and he was mocked by his colleagues in the Merchant Navy. I think they called him Birdman or something, because he was looking at the albatrosses and looking at what type of lift the wings had and these big things that could fly. And there's another interesting point there, because when he left the employment of Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway, he applied for a job at the Bolton Tram Company and didn't get the job because his reference from the manager at Horwich Works, a guy called Henry Hoy, who was the works manager, gave him a poor reference because he said this guy's more interested in cycling than he is in engineering. And he made these push bikes being the edge of the cutting edge of cycling. And there we bring another link probably with the aircraft position because of the learning he made from lightweight tubing and all the rest that comes with cycling. So there's probably a link in all that somewhere. So although he spent a lot of time on social activities in Horwich, and the manager thought he might not, he's more interested in cycling than engineering, he did pretty well for himself. And Horwich is very pleased that we played our little part in helping him on his way.
When you think he could have ended up in trams.
Absolutely, Bolton trams, which had a limited lifespan. But yeah, that's right, Bolton trams. But Bolton trams, it was actually a big outfit. It covered all the borough of Bolton, but I'm not sure how long he would have stayed interested in that particular field of engineering.
But he sounds like a person, doesn't he, who threw himself into whatever he did.
Yeah, absolutely. And he thoroughly enjoyed it. And also he wanted to try things. He wanted to try his best and try to get them to win. The cycling, the running. I'm sure he even did the same when he was skating on that lodge that he fell through. That would have been something in the same way, but he wanted to be ahead. And it's no surprise, I suppose, that with somebody with so much imagination and capacity for abstract thought and developed in a way he could, his inventive mind, that he perhaps wasn't the most astute businessman in terms of financial matters, but he was actually incredibly good as a visionary designer, and that's actually what's left us with such a legacy today.
Because my image of him has always been of obviously a very focused person. Yes, visionary in terms of aviation, but very focused. But this is a whole other side to his
that's
character,
right. That's right. Yeah,
which is lovely to hear because it's the man, isn't it?
It's how it is, and he was a young man.
Yeah.
In a town full of young people.
Yeah.
Horwich was, people came to Horwich from other parts of the country, from most parts of the British Isles and some from other parts of the British Empire as it was then. But it was a young, growing town with a lot of things going for it. And people came to the town. So he'd have been surrounded by people his own age with a very energetic environment. So it's not surprising. But I do go back to that point I made earlier. I just wonder whether it bored him a little bit. Steam locomotives and all the rest of it, and the rigidity of the railway business as it was in the time, very hierarchical, and he wanted to be a bit more abstract and dynamic and agile in his work. And I do wonder whether that was part of it, but he certainly enjoyed his time in Horwich
because he was clearly able enough to have had a glittering career had he wanted.
Absolutely.
So
the works manager Henry Haw, who said, he's more interested in cycling than engineering. He perhaps did miss a trick there. Perhaps she'd have encouraged him to stay, and we might have had a different railway system than we have today with his presence.
He sounds a bit like the guy who turned down the Beatles, doesn't he?
Well, it does feel a bit like that. Yeah. But sometimes people need to be turned down to give them a start, don't they, in something else, and to give them some drive to say, I'll show you. And I do think he was probably very, very competitive in everything he did. So if somebody says you're not going to be any good at this, I suspect he thought, I'll show you. I
think he certainly did that. He did.
Yeah.
I always ask this, anything you would like to have talked about that just didn't crop up?
No, I think that's it. I think I'm fine with it. I hope I've painted a picture of the place. What I would say is that there's probably more to tell about A.V. Roe and his time around Horwich, because there was all types of things went on in terms of social and different activities. I said shooting clubs, fire, all types of things. Flower arranging, they did all types of things. The RMI did. It's something like 80 different societies within the RMI, some of which are surviving today. One's the football, and I believe A.V. Roe played football as well. And Horwich Harriers are still surviving today, and he was in the early version of what became Horwich Heritage, which I think it's just celebrated its 100 years anniversary. So it was certainly a part of the emergence of the town, and I think we're all very proud of that.
And when we were chatting earlier, I think you mentioned there was some interest in whether some blue plaques could go up in
in Horwich, the council do things and Horwich Heritage do things. So if it's a building they want to recognise, they put like a green plaque up. If it's an individual who's been in that building, a blue plaque. So we are trying to find out exactly where he lived. The difficulty then becomes is an issue when it's sometimes a private residence and they don't want a plaque on the outside of the building, which sometimes happens. But some of the other railway engineers who lived in Horwich, we've identified where they live. A guy called George Hughes, who was a strong railway locomotive designer, and we found that he lived in one of these houses on Victoria Road, but he lived there for a number of years, where A.V. Roe, I suspect A.V. Roe might have lived at different places as a lodger, so it may be that we struggle finding a place where we can put the plaque, but we're all very proud of his presence, and it does raise eyebrows when we tell younger people these days that this guy was around. And it wasn't just the Avro Lancaster, of course, it was the Vulcan, which was active into the 1980s and beyond. It was active service in the Falklands, of course. So it does raise eyebrows when we tell people about that.
Derek, it's wonderful that interest and admiration for A.V. Roe is being continued to this present day. If you find out more things, we'd love to have you back. And do come and visit the museum when you've got a bit more time and have a look, and you can see all the aviation bits then.
We will do, absolutely. That's a piece somebody wrote for us about A.V. Roe and the mechanics, and it was wrote on the back of the demise of the mechanics, but it talks about A.V. Roe. This chap's died now, Ken Fields, unfortunately, but very, very a good writer. You can see the piece on it. But there's a couple of newspaper articles, so you can have a look yourself. And if you want these emailing to you, I can do. Not very good copies, but you can. If you email them, you can obviously blow them up. But there he is, when he made his scooter in his garden, so a closed-in scooter. So he was designing things in his 80s. So he never gave up, but it talks in there about him falling through the ice and all the rest of it. So
fantastic.
Okay.
Thank you ever so much.
No problem at all. It's been a pleasure. Enjoyed it.
Thanks again to Derek for giving us that intriguing insight into AV Roe as a teenager and young adult. And as Derek mentioned, you can see AV Roe's innovative railway coupling design in one of the display cases just adjacent to the cafeteria in the museum. That's all for this episode, but please listen out for the next release of the Horwich Heritage Museum podcast. We also look forward to seeing you at the museum. Bye for now.